back to the Fly Tour recapping Day 7 of the Women's World Championship happening in České Budějovice, Czechia. So hopping today, of course, with the scores from today's game, starting with an 8-0 victory for Sweden over Norway. Now, this was a game that, yes, you can finally, at this tournament, look at the scoreboard and say, yes, that was the game we saw. Sweden dominated play for pretty much the entire game. Norway couldn't get much going like we've seen them done in the games past, where you see a couple offensive chances going back the other way. But in this one, it really was all Sweden. And as they sort of look ahead into the quarterfinals, they got a tough game against Finland coming up. But if they can play like they did today, especially with the way Norway plays, very similar to how Finland plays, I think Sweden does have an interesting shot here to, number one, make the semifinals, and then from there do something in them. This Swedish team has shown themselves at this tournament, especially if they can play to their standard, to be able to really take control of the game. And I think when you see them play teams like a Canada or a US, that's what you have to do. You have to find ways to play chippy, play aggressively. And I think that's exactly where this Swedish team can fit right in. I don't know if they'll beat Canada or the US quite yet, but at the very least, I do think that they do have a shot at the medals this year, especially playing against what you're likely going to see if they can get through Finland, is going to be the Czechs in the bronze medal game. So something to keep an eye on there for the Swedes. They've played a really good tournament so far. They've had games where they haven't played quite up to their level, but you've seen what they can do, especially in that first game against Germany, where they played their game for the entire 60, minus a couple mishaps here and there. In this game as well, they played their game for the full 60. So I'll be curious to see which Swedish team comes out to play against the Finns. Always a game to get up for. Very similarly to the Canada-US rivalry, that's what they have in Sweden. Sweden and Finland always has been. So that's the one thing I'm keeping an eye on there for the Swedes. They can play their game. They definitely have a shot in that one. If they kind of take some shifts off, you're going to see the Finns capitalize on it. So that's what we have for Sweden. As for Norway, they are relegated. That happened yesterday. But still, for Norway, it's been a good tournament for them. They beat Hungary, not expected to do all that much at this tournament, but they still found ways to contend. And I think when you look at that team, and yes, they're going back down to Division 1A, but I think in a couple of years, we're going to see that Norway team back better than ever. They've had tight games, especially against good teams at this tournament. Yes, the 8-0 loss isn't exactly how you want to go out, but at the same time, lots to hold high head about for Norway at this tournament. They did play a really good tournament. Unfortunately, just came up a little bit short. But that'll do it for the first game. Not too much to talk about. It's an 8-0 game. But the second game, and this was the game of the day, because obviously this was the only one that actually had any impact on the standings. But we have a 1-0 victory for Japan over Germany. And now, this was a game that I would say would be goalied, I think is probably the best term I'd use to describe it. But at the same time, Japan played their game really well today. And, you lose your best player early with Akane Shiga going down with a leg injury, having to be stretchered off. It's not easy to be able to come back after that and be able to play your style of hockey. But Japan did that, and they were able to find opportunities where, yes, at the end of the day, Germany played well, and they probably should have taken this game. But at the same time, Japan played exactly as they needed to get the win today. It's a 1-0 victory. You're not going to be able to outscore a team like Germany. So you played exactly like you needed to, and you got the win. So for Japan, it's a great game. Shiga likely not going to return to this tournament, especially when you see what happened on the play. It wasn't a great look. And you collide awkwardly into the boards. You get stretchered off. Looks like a leg. Don't want to speculate, of course, but it doesn't look good. So for Japan, you're going to be playing it without your best player. You're going to have a tough game against Canada coming up, where you're really going to have to rely on that structured game to have any shot against a tough Canadian team, not to mention trying to score goals, which has already been a little bit of a struggle against some of the better teams at this tournament. Something to keep an eye on there for sure. So 1-0 today for Japan. Japan does get the win, locks up the second spot in Group B. And as for Germany today, yes, they got shut out. But in my eyes, they did everything that they could in this one, and unfortunately just got goalied at the end of the day. But Germany played their game for the full 60. Looked good, pretty good doing it. You take a couple penalties here and there, probably not what you want to do. But for Germany, playing a good enough game today, I thought, to get the win. And we'll see if they can continue that. Obviously, you're coming up against a real tough test with the U.S. not likely going to take that one, but you really never know because it could go either way. But that's what we have for the second game, a 1-0 victory for Japan. Japan locks up the second spot in Group B. Germany locks up the third spot in Group B, solidifying the standings, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But one last game of the day before we get into the news. We have a 5-0 victory for the U.S. over Switzerland. And this game is not a 5-0 game. This tournament has kind of been about that, where the scoreboard hasn't exactly been what it should be. And what I will say is this game should have been a lot more of a blowout than it was, because the U.S. controlled play for, in my eyes, 59 minutes of that game, with the odd exception of Switzerland dumping the puck down into the U.S. end and maybe getting a chance off an errant pass. But other than that, the U.S. owned this game from start to finish. And if they're going to play like that against, say, their quarterfinal opponent in Germany, Germany doesn't stand a shot. And I think if they continue to play like that, like the way they did against the Swiss today, against Finland or the Czechs or Sweden, whoever they see in that eventual second round matchup, they're going to be okay. So for the U.S., I mean, you're playing in a meaningless game against Switzerland. Obviously, that had nothing to do with the standings because the U.S. couldn't move down. They already won the games they needed to at this tournament. So you're really resting your top players, and they still come out and put out that kind of dominant effort. So for the U.S. today, a real good game. We'll see if they can continue that into the quarterfinal rounds. I don't see that to be a problem, but you really never know. And as for Switzerland today, we'll talk about it in the news in a little bit, but the goaltending today was a ginormous plus. And I know the score is 5-0, and I know, you let in 5 goals. It probably is not a great game for your goaltender, but it really was for Andrea Brandley. And I think for Switzerland at this tournament, they're coming in, not expected to do too much. They're the team on the bubble in Group A. Obviously, they are getting rid of that top 5 in Group A standings for the next tournament. But at the same time, if this tournament format stayed, that placement game has Switzerland's name written all over it as the team who is going to be sent back down to Group B, whether it be through Germany or through Sweden. So for Switzerland, it's being able to hold the U.S. to 5-0. Yes, it's 5-0. Should have been a lot more. But for Switzerland today, it's another game where you just kind of wipe it. Yes, you're going into a quarterfinal matchup against the Czechs where you're going to have to bring your game. Goaltending is going to be a big part of that. So we move on now to the news, starting with Norway, who should be holding their heads high from this tournament. As we sort of talked about, they weren't expected to do too much at this tournament, and they got the win that they needed to. They gave Sweden in a meaningless game a chance, but at the same time, they lost the games they needed to against a tough German and Japan team, and unfortunately, that was their writing on the walls in this one. So for Norway, they can hold their heads high from what they've accomplished at this tournament. I'm sure we'll see them back in a couple of years, being promoted back from Division 1A. And as for Sweden, they are finally ready to face off against Finland, and I think it's not written in stone at all. And I know you can probably see it in the background here with Sweden and Finland sitting right next to each other, the jerseys on the wall. But what I will say is these two teams are going to come to play against each other, and it's going to be a good one. In my eyes, probably the game of the day of the quarterfinals, which we'll talk about in a little bit here. But for Sweden, look out. They are a team to keep an eye on at this tournament, much like the Czechs, where you really don't know what you're getting from them. Sweden is a young team at this tournament with a lot of potential. Should be interesting to see which team comes to play in that quarterfinal and beyond if they continue to make it far in this tournament. As for Germany today, they did get goalied. Fortunately for them, not too much they could do. Generated quite a few high-quality chances, just couldn't find the back of the net. So that's what we have in that one. As for Japan with the Akane Shiga injury, and it's a huge injury for Japan at this tournament, where she's been one of the biggest goal scorers and sources of offense for the team. And now you're going to look for other people to step up, and we'll see who that next person to step up is going to be for this Japanese team, because they need someone to step up in a big way. And I'm, once again, very interested to see who that might be, especially against a tough Canadian team where you're looking to win that game 1-0, 2-1, because as soon as it gets into a scoring affair, it's going to be over for this Japanese team. So something to keep an eye on there. for the rest of the tournament for Japan. Obviously, goal scoring hasn't been their strongest suit, if you want to say that. But at the same time, they're going to need someone to pick up the scoring if they want any shot at contending at this tournament. Then on to Switzerland with a big plus, and we sort of already talked with Andrea Brandley for Switzerland in net has been a big plus for them. And I think in general, that's exactly what you're looking for out of your goalie. And yes, 5-0, sure. But this game should have been a lot more held down by Andrea Brandley. So for Switzerland, you're going to need her in the playoffs. You're going up against a tough Czech team who's struggled somewhat with scoring. Yes, they've got some goals here and there, but to continue with that strain of goals is something I'm going to keep an eye on, because for Switzerland, goaltending is going to be crucial. Defense is going to be crucial, because as soon as you get into a goal-scoring battle, I'm giving the edge to the Czechs. So that's what we have for Switzerland. Then on to the U.S. with another dominant performance from them. They've definitely had the best group play we've seen so far, with maybe the exception of Sweden. And obviously Sweden's been playing against somewhat weaker opponents, but I think out of the two teams, I'm going to give that better dominant performance relative to their competition to the U.S., with the exception of maybe the back half of that Canada game. They've outplayed every team from start to finish at this tournament. So we'll see if they can continue that into their quarterfinal matchup. They're going to have a tough opponent in Germany, but I don't think it's going to be all that much of a problem. They can continue to play the way that they did. However, if they start to play down to their competition, like we've somewhat seen in years past, something to definitely keep an eye on there, because it will be an interesting game nonetheless. We'll move on now to the standings, where we have in Group A the final standings, of course, with the U.S. in first, Canada in second, Finland in third, Czechs in fourth, and Switzerland in last place. You have the beautiful 12-9, 6-3-0 standings on Group A, and as well in Group B, the exact same, where we have Sweden in first, Japan in second, Germany in third, Norway in fourth, and Hungary in fifth. A reminder that both teams who are in fourth and fifth place in Group B are relegated from this tournament, will be sent back down to Division 1A. So Norway and Hungary will be sent back down to Division 1A, which is obviously unfortunate for them, but we move on. And the way it works, of course, with the quarterfinal matchups is A1 plays B3, A2 plays B2, A3 plays B1, and A4 plays A5 in the quarterfinals. Teams do get reseeded at the semis. So we'll flip it over now to the playoff picture. I will remind everyone that this playoff picture isn't exactly as black and white as it may seem, because the teams do get reseeded in the semifinals. So you can take a look at this bracket and say it's great. But this bracket does assume that all of Canada, US, Czechs, and Finland all do win their games against their opponents. But for example, if Sweden does win, Canada would play the winner of the Czechs and the Swiss, assuming Canada, US, and doesn't matter the other team, and then the US would play Sweden. So very interesting. The joys of this kind of tournament, where we see more or less here the Group A, and one of the reasons in my eyes why they're getting rid of this is because for Group B teams, it's nearly impossible to do anything at this tournament, especially when you're looking at the way that these groups are seeded. So for Canada, for the US, not going to be terrible for them. I expect them to take both those games. The Czech-Swiss game, I think, could be an interesting one, especially if the Swiss can hold on. Laura Stalder is another one I'm keeping an eye on. Obviously, she's missed the last two games for Switzerland, so we'll see whether that's going to be a hindrance to the Swiss team. I think if she's out, the Czechs are going to be at a significant more advantage. Not to mention Mueller for Switzerland is also going to have to pick up her game to respond to the loss of Stalder, which we've kind of seen at this tournament, especially Alina Mueller, to pick up her game. So we will see whether or not Switzerland is going to be able to find that and pull off the upset against the home Czechs, which I think is going to be a real tough test, but you really never know. And as for Sweden and Finland, this game is going to be probably the best game we'll see at this tournament. These two teams, in my eyes, are very close. You're going to see Sweden pick up the pace on Finland, and I think Finland's going to be a team here that is going to pounce on any Swedish mistake, which I don't think we've seen Sweden have too many problems with so far at this tournament. And as much as Sweden's played a good game, they've been sloppy at times, and I think if they're sloppy against the Finns, that's where you're going to see Finland really pick up their game and find the back of the net off rush chances, off mistakes, as Finland has done so many times at these international tournaments. because for Finland, they're a team here that are looking for some damage. And I think for Sweden, they make enough mistakes where this could be a factor. And I think for Finland, it's about finishing those chances. Any chance you can get, you have to be able to finish it if you want any chance at winning this game. So that's what we're looking for in these games. I think Canada, Japan, not going to be too bad. I expect Canada to really dominate the offensive end in that one. I think the loss of Akane Shiga is really going to hurt Japan. And I think for the U.S. against Germany, I expect the U.S. to basically stay in the German end for the full 60 minutes, with the exception of maybe one or two German chances. We'll see whether that's the case, but I do expect that to be the general standard for this tournament, this playoff. The only one I'm really interested in terms of this changing of seeding, I think, is Finland and Sweden, because I think that game is going to be a real close one, much closer than most people might give it credit for. We'll now talk about the schedule, as the schedule has been released for the quarterfinal action. So we start here at 4 a.m. between Sweden and Finland. I talked about how important that game is for both these countries. It's going to be a good one. As for Germany and the U.S. at 7:30, might not be so great, but I do expect it still to be a good game nonetheless. Then 11 a.m., we got the host Czechs against Switzerland. All these times are in Eastern Standard Time. I do expect the Czechs to take this one, but at the same time, Switzerland's a team at this tournament that's shown that they can contend with teams who might take it a little bit easier on them, as we saw against Finland the other day. So keep an eye on the Swiss, especially if they can keep the game close. You can't write them off quite yet. And then at 2:30 p.m., you have Canada taking on Japan, and what is going to be an interesting game. We haven't seen Canada play their best game, in my eyes, at least at this tournament, quite yet. So we'll see if that comes against the Japanese team on April 17th. Remember, we do get the day off tomorrow, or whenever you're watching this. April 16th is a no game day, but we do start bright and early on April 17th. Full coverage, of course, will be here on the channel, as well as our Twitter page. But that will wrap up our scheduled programming for today. We will jump into live questions today. We have two comments. We'll start here with one from Nick, the Iihf fan, who says, what are your thoughts on Switzerland starting Brantley in a game where neither they nor the U.S. had anything to play for? Even with the day off to come, I can't imagine getting peppered with 53 shots in one game would be ideal. As for Germany and Japan, I think that's the best goaltending display I've seen from Asahura since I started watching her at this tournament. And the first thing I will say about Brantley is she didn't play yesterday against the Finns. And so her last game at this tournament was April 11th, which was 4 days ago. You take into account they do get tomorrow off, which will make it 5th day. So you're really looking at a 6-day rest period for Andrea Brantley. And what I will say, especially for goaltenders that we've seen, is that they like to have some sort of action before they play. So I think in many ways you might have started her against Finland yesterday, which would have been a much better move for the Swiss. But at the same time, yes, you face 50 shots, you get a lot of action. That might be what she was more looking for, is just getting some touches on the puck. And really, I think that's what Switzerland's looking for, because this entire tournament will come down to the game that matters for them, which, of course, for Switzerland is against the Czechs. If they can beat the Czechs, then all of a sudden they're guaranteed a shot to play for a medal. If they lose to the Czechs, they play in the placement game. Obviously, it doesn't matter as much as years past, but you're probably looking at a demotion from the Group A to the Group B in the old standards. But it is important to some of these teams to be able to say, yeah, we're the top 5 teams in the women's division. We saw Switzerland last year almost lose to Germany. That's where I think that sort of play comes from, especially with Brantley and net. I think that's where you're going to see her kind of turn that, and I think that's more of a goalie decision rather than a coach's decision. So I do think at this tournament for Brantley, that's exactly what she needed today, is to face a lot of shots, get herself ready for the quarterfinal matchup against a tough Czech team. As for the Germany-Japan game, Asahura was great for Japan, obviously. We talked about it a little bit already, with Japan basically goalieing Germany in this game, and 1-0 was your final. But without the goaltender today, I think it could have been a lot more of a margin for Germany. So that's what you have here for the first question. On to the second question we go, from NJ Wizards, who says, who will take the Czech versus Swiss game? And I think for the Czechs in this tournament, obviously they're on home ice. We've seen them at times kind of struggle with it a little bit, riding the momentum out. And it's one of the problems, I think, when you're an underdog team at this kind of tournament, where if you go on a run and you win, it's really good. And if you can sort of ride the crowd momentum, it's really good. However, when you're up one and then you start to lose it, you take the crowd out of it with each goal. So in reality, your momentum that you're playing with on the ice is amplified by the crowd. So I think for Switzerland, if they can find ways to take the crowd out, especially early in this one, don't be surprised to see the Swiss run away with it. However, if the Czechs can find their game early on in this one, expect the Czechs to really run away with this game. I don't think it'll be as close as some people might think. I do expect the Czechs to find their goal-scoring touch and move along in this tournament quite okay. But if the Swiss can hang around, they're always a dangerous team. If you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching. If you'd like to drop a like if you like, consider subscribing. Tell all your friends and comment down below your thoughts on Day 7 of the Women's World Championship. Until next time,